Hello and welcome to this 12th lecture in our series for our course on drought. Today we turn to model 3, and in this module we're going to discuss how do we really deal with drought? What is the answer to the problem? What can we do? But before we do that, I want to thank you for being with us. Thank you for taking this course, and I hope that you're enjoying yourself. Now, you would recall that in module 1 we studied the questions as to what are droughts, why they are important to us, and where they occur. And in those lectures we discussed, generally speaking, what is the nature of drought. Then in module 2, we went on to the question of the cascading effects of drought. In other words, what drought actually leads to, what kind of impacts drought have. We also discussed the question of the severity of drought, the spatial extent of drought, and the intensity of drought. So now we know what the problem is. We know what are the impacts of that problem. But that's not enough. What we really want to be able to do is to solve the problem. And so this is what module 3 is concerned with. And in module 3, we would look at the question of having a proactive approach to drought. In other words, how do we act even before the drought happens? Secondly, we would look at the question of public awareness. In other words, what is the role of people knowing, the public at large knowing about this? Thirdly, we would look at something called the UNCCD Drought Toolbox. We have a toolbox which explains some things that you can do when you want to deal with drought. And fourthly, of course, we would look into the question as to what you can do in your little corner of the world, wherever you are on the globe, to help in fighting drought, to help in mitigating the effects of drought, so to speak. So now, let's turn to the first question. What is a proactive approach? What do we mean by that? Well, before we go into that, let us remember that drought happens slowly. Drought is not like a hurricane. It's not like a flood. It's not like a storm. It's not like an earthquake. It creeps up on you. And so therefore, because it creeps up on you, it sort of becomes invisible, imperceptible. It's only when it really starts to hit you, then you realize a drought is taking place. And that is why we need to deal with drought slightly differently in many ways as regards a natural hazard. Okay? And so in having a proactive approach, we have to take into consideration the fact that usually with drought, right, because it's so invisible, because it creeps up on you, right, people are not aware. So the first thing we have to do in terms of a proactive approach is to ensure that drought is visible. What do we mean by that? We mean that people understand that drought actually do take place and that they do have effects on people. Okay, this is the first thing we have to do. Now, we also have to make sure that people understand that drought is everybody's business. It's not just the people who live in the affected area, but all of us. So therefore, in terms of taking a proactive approach, the first thing we have to do is what? Raise awareness, public awareness. And this is why we are having this course. Because without that public awareness, then nobody knows what is happening. Okay? Now, secondly, when we deal with drought, we have to understand that we're trying to figure out what are some of the measures we can take beforehand, right? So that by the time the drought arrives, okay, we have some answers. So for example, if we know a region is prone to drought, we can, during the rainy season, right, have catchments, collect water and so on, okay? Make sure that the reservoirs are full. By the time the drought comes around, if it comes around, we have a water supply. So you see, outside of that, when we take a proactive approach, we must understand that there are great benefits to this, as I just demonstrated, okay? Not being proactive could mean that the impacts of drought can be more devastating, more dangerous to us, okay? So we therefore need to ensure that we take such actions. Now, you have to remember that when a drought comes, it can last a long time. Okay, we know a drought can last for one season and it can last for years. The longer it lasts and the greater the intensity, okay, is the greater the problem. What do we therefore have to do in terms of making drought visible and in terms of having a proactive approach. We have to ensure that people understand this kind of nature of drought, okay? And that, because it has this kind of nature, we have to have plans which look at the long term. Because nobody really knows how long a drought is going to be. And so therefore, in having this proactive approach, what are we talking about in essence? We are talking about developing plans. That is what we're really talking about. What kind of plans we can put in place to ensure that when the drought do hit, the impacts are less. Okay? And those plans, as I've said before, are based on awareness. People have got to be aware that drought is real. And in making those plans, we have to remember that everybody has a role. But some people have special roles. So in raising awareness, there are specific groups that awareness needs to be given in particular ways. Okay? For example, people who might live in the region and who live out of the region, the information is slightly different, okay? That's one. People who have to be involved directly, for example, government officials and so on, technical people, right? Again, the awareness there is slightly different. But in all of this, what we have to understand is that to have the proper plans and so on, we must use what? Expert knowledge. There are people who know about drought, who understand what this is from a scientific standpoint, from a practical standpoint, and we must use to help us to get the information that we want to deal with. Ultimately, therefore, what does this proactive attitude mean? Well, it means empowering all of us, and in particular, those who are vulnerable to drought, right, to deal with it when it comes. This is what we actually mean. In other words, ahead of the drought itself, we already think about it, we already work on issues around it, and we already have a plan to deal with it when it comes. Of course, every drought is a different phenomena in one way or the other. And so as it comes along, we would have to do different things. But generally speaking, right, we can have a proactive approach. In other words, we can act ahead of time and therefore minimize the impacts of drought. Finally, I want to remind you that you can call us, write to us, if you have any problems in taking this course. We also will be glad if you can share it with other people, okay? And until next time, I am Richard Byron Cox.